For this Field Trip Friday, Larissa and I, we're going out with a bang. We were invited to Fort Mackinac for this week's Field Trip Friday, but first, we had to wake up bright and early to catch the 7:30 a.m. Starline Ferry.
Let's venture back to the 1800s when Fort Mackinac was the prime location for Great Lake control and the beginning to the War of 1812. The heavy artillery sits atop a bluff 150 feet above Marquette Park. I could not wait to pull the rope and fire the cannon for the first time this season.
All right, well, welcome to the Upper Gun Platform. My name is Trevor. I am joined here by Sage, and you two are going to be our cannon crew here at Fort Mackinac today.
Trevor and Sage showed everything soldiers from the 1800s had to do to master this weapon.
It was a bit more complicated than just lighting a fuse.
And with that, we can then wheel this cannon forward and into the firing position.
Ooh, this is my workout of the day.
And at the top of this tube, there's a chemical known as fulminated mercury. Now, this chemical is extremely volatile, so it's very friction sensitive. So, when this pin is pulled, it will cause it to flare up. It will ignite the very fine gunpowder. It'll send a jet of flame through the touch hole and set off our cannon here today. Ready? Fire!
Wow, that was exciting.
Oh, that was so awesome.
Again. We met with Mackinac State Historic Parks marketing manager Dominic Miller, who gave us a tour of the entire fort.
Walking through the museum felt like we were one of the troops. To learn more about this war ground, Larissa and I spoke with the Deputy Director, Steve Brisson.
The fort, when it existed on the mainland, had been both a civilian community and a military establishment, and the British never liked that. So when they moved things over to the island, they separated the soldiers from the civilians, putting the civilians down below in the village and the fort up here. When the British built the fort, it was acknowledged that the most vulnerable point of the fort would be from the back. And they always planned to put up further defenses on the heights above the fort, but they never got around to that. After the Americans took over the fort from the British in 1896, they didn't get around to that either.
On July 17, 1812, the United States declared war against the British. But the soldiers at Fort Mackinac were unaware of the attack that was about to take place.
The fort sits on a bluff that overlooks the docks and the front of the island, making it easy to spot the enemy, but the fort had a blind spot.
So when war was declared between Great Britain and the U.S. during the War of 1812, the British quickly came over to Fort Mackinac, a sneak attack, and exploited that flaw. And easily captured the fort.
The British, Canadians, and Native American soldiers marched with cannons, overtaking the 60 men that were chosen to protect the fort.
The United States had no choice but to give up the island, which became a back and forth battle to control the fur trade and strategic straits between Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. It's amazing to imagine that the War of 1812 started in our own backyard.
The Americans fought hard to reclaim this fort. Now this treasured land is a Pandora's box to history buffs and military men and women.
It was a fort with a long history. From 1780 to 1895, it was a functioning fort. So for 115 years, and that was kind of unusual for forts in America in the 19th century. So by the time Fort Mackinac closed in 1895, it was already kind of an antique fort. It was kind of acknowledged that it had a great history, and tourism, of course, by that time was already big on Mackinac Island. The tourists were coming up to see Fort Mackinac when it was still an active military post. I think A visit to Fort Mackinac is one of the highlights to coming to Mackinac Island. It's kind of an icon of the island, a major landmark. Coming to the island and not visiting the fort is like going to Rome and not visiting the Colosseum, or going to Paris and not seeing Notre Dame. You have to go to those landmarks, and Fort Mackinac is the chief landmark on the island. But there's a lot of other things to do here as well. We operate a number of other historic sites downtown, and 82% of the island is part of Mackinac Island State Park.
We welcome you to get in uniform, go back in time, and march through Fort Mackinac. On Mackinac Island, history comes to life.
Well, you have to tune in next time for Field Trip Friday and see the next adventure Larissa and I are heading on to.